Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in this video we're going to be talking about a very hypothetical concept known as the white hole. Well, in a sense it's kind of like the black hole, but the opposite of it. And in this video I wanted to actually try to simulate this using a little trick in Space Engine where you can technically make a white hole. And so we're going to take a look at what all of this will look like in Space Engine, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the science behind it. Now, by now, I think most of you probably know that black holes are out there and that they kind of maybe sort of look like this. These are objects that no light can escape. They're extremely powerful, relatively small in size usually, and also possess some very interesting effects, such as the ability to manipulate space-time around them and cause some really interesting effects. But today we're not talking about black holes, we're talking about the opposite. And theoretically, they are actually possible. Even Einstein believed that if there is something called black hole, then there should be something called white hole. It would be pretty much the opposite of a black hole, even though both would possess singularity, and for the most part, they would have relatively similar effects, including having the same components, such as mass, charge, and spin. However, black holes, we've seen quite a lot of them, as a matter of fact. But ever since we started looking at the night skies, we have never seen a single white hole. And I mean, technically they should be really easy to spot. They're the opposite of black holes, so they would constantly emit energy and light. They would constantly be very bright. And because of that, they should be relatively easy to notice. So back in 2006, there was at least one potential observation of a white hole or wormhole because there was an unexplained event that was very powerful. This event was known as GRB 060614, and GRB stands for gamma ray burst, a very powerful burst of energy that suddenly happens for, well, usually unknown reasons, but normally it's actually because of black holes. So sometimes black holes, they swallow something and they create a tremendous amount of energy, spew it out and create these gamma ray bursts. But in this case, it was very difficult to explain, and it's still kind of not really well explained even today. But that was the only time. Shouldn't we see more? Because we've seen quite a lot of black holes. And so for this reason, I wanted to start by trying to create one in Space Engine, but also then talking a little bit more about the features and the effects you might experience if they exist. And without further ado, well, I guess here it is. So here it doesn't really look anything different from a typical black hole, but we really need to start coming closer to realize how different it might potentially be. So I'm going to zoom in here and also make things a little bit less bright because it's very blinding in this particular area and it's very difficult to see things. But right in the middle, right there, you can kind of see it's not really a black hole. This would be a wormhole. This would be a white hole. Now, the main feature of this object is that even though things are attracted to it and even though it does have mass, you can't really fall into it. As a matter of fact, you'll constantly be falling into it, but it will constantly repel you at the same time. And this is something unusual and very weird, very hard to imagine. So it has mass, you're kind of approaching it, but then it won't let you in and it will constantly push you out. So in that sense, the white holes are very unusual, very interesting objects, and the only reason I'm allowed to come so close to it is because this is a simulation. And as you can see, you can also pretty much see entire universe in it. Well, not really the universe itself, but everything that's coming out of it is kind of looking more and more like a separate world. We can actually even enter it if we wanted to, and hypothetically if you enter it, you should come out on the other side of the wormhole and in a completely different location in the universe, or maybe even in a completely different universe altogether. But all of this is very hypothetical, like I said, because we don't really know if these things even exist. And because this is the opposite of a black hole, essentially matter and light always escape it, and this is why you would call it a white hole, not a black hole. And we think that theoretically, maybe black holes actually are the evolution of white holes. So there are certain mathematical theories that try to show that back in the days, black holes were white holes, and then eventually they flipped and became black holes. So it's possible that this is actually the past of a typical black hole. But of course there are other theories, and some even suggest the opposite, that black holes turn into white holes with time. So there's a bit of a confusion about what's really happening here. We just know that black holes and white holes are somewhat related to each other. But unlike black holes that we know how they form and we have a lot of theories on how they can be created, we don't have that for white holes. As a matter of fact, there is not a single explanation for how these could be formed from physical objects out there in the universe. For example, a star would not turn into a white hole. It would turn into a black hole, but not really this. So there's no explanation for how this could exist and how it would be made. But I guess one explanation here would be that maybe these were actually created by the Big Bang. As a matter of fact, at least one explanation suggests that Big Bang was a very large white hole, and eventually, with time, either completely fell apart into smaller white holes and then those turn into black holes, or it still is a white hole that's still expanding and growing larger and larger. But once again, no actual proof for that. These are all still very highly speculative ideas, because we don't really understand how these could exist and how they could form. And I guess one of the most scientific explanations is actually using something known as Hawking radiation. In other words, if you were to take a typical black hole, it's not really truly black. Today we believe that all black holes emit something known as Hawking radiation that Stephen Hawking proposed and explained and was able to mathematically prove, and a smaller black hole would emit even more Hawking radiation. And at some point, if a black hole is really small and starts losing mass, it starts emitting so much Hawking radiation that it can hypothetically turn into a white hole and release a tremendous amount of energy. Some of the proposals actually suggest that one of the ways we could potentially create a lot of energy, and possibly even free energy, is by controlling black holes and making them into this intermediary stage where they turn into white holes and start emitting a lot of energy. And by feeding them more matter, we can kind of harvest this, and these would hypothetically be white holes. But until we learn how to create and manipulate black holes, we'll never be able to actually prove this, unfortunately. And so that's kind of one other mathematical explanation for what these objects might be and how they might be able to exist. But interestingly, this is always something that fascinates me. A white hole by definition is something that you can't fall into. But assuming of course that white holes turn into black holes, what happens here is that you kind of freeze right in front of the white hole until it turns into a black hole. And then you suddenly enter it. So if this is how things actually do happen in nature, there's a lot of things to learn here, and there's a lot of things to potentially explain and understand. And maybe, just maybe, one day we'll be able to discover these and even find a way to travel through them to other locations in the universe or even into other universes. But for now, that's all we know. It's a very hypothetical concept, has not been seen, has only been proven mathematically, but even that is very, very vague. And this is how you can create this in Space Engine. And if you're wondering how I actually made this, well, it's really, really easy. All you need to do is pick any black hole, and in this case I actually picked the biggest one in our galaxy, and then just change the spectrum right here from X, which corresponds to the black hole spectrum, to Z or Z, which corresponds to a hypothetical wormhole or hypothetical white hole. And this is how I made this in Space Engine, and you can check this out by yourself and do the same and play around with it. On that note, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Come back tomorrow to learn something else. Subscribe if you still haven't, and share this video with someone who enjoys learning about space and sciences. Space out, and as always, bye bye.